Hey friends, it's Anthony David Adams. Some of you have asked me to put together a short video on understanding this new framework, the Duality-Unity integrative model. So I wanted to put some videos together to explain this new framework and way of understanding. So if you hang with me for this video, I would say this model is something that it really is going to revolutionize modern psychiatry and personal growth. The more folks that understand this, in a sense, this is nothing. There's nothing new about this, and that it's inherent in the human history. It's inherent in our DNA. It's inherent in our general experience of the world. But the way which with this new model is being presented and framed is such that it can be massively transformative. So I invite you to come along and learn about this new model. It's something that when you get it, it can open up tremendous possibilities for deeper relationships with yourself, with other people, give you a much deeper insight into just who you are, give you a model for exploration of the interior and also with kind of the exterior. It'll help you frame up kind of an understanding of some basic questions, such as what is personal growth? It's surprising to me how many coaches and experts and personal growth people I talk to, when I ask them, well, what is personal growth? I get a very kind of choppy answer. I'm actually not being told what actually personal growth is. We're going to give an answer to what love is on a fundamental level, and we're also going to talk a little bit about how to create the most optimum personality for yourself, creating the optimal personality for who you are. So before we dive into this, we kind of need to set up a little bit of some parameters here. The basics for this model are really, they're focused around an understanding of yourself in your relationship to your experience. And so if we look at kind of what the current mythology of our time is, which is basically one with which we start, kind of the start point is 13.7 billion Earth years ago, this thing called the pre-Big Bang singularity, which is a point that's of infinitely small size and of infinitely massive energy, basically. This kind of just this single point. And from that single point, there was an explosion or expansion into space-time. So that point enters into space-time effectively, and within that space-time construct, now we have 13.7 billion years later, we have Anthony David Adams and his audience, the folks that are listening, and you. So there's a fundamental separation between me and you that we experience on a regular basis. I mean, even though there might be some sense of oneness, there still is an experience of separateness. And so that paradox, the paradox of being one while maintaining a sense of duality, is what we call the dialectic tension. This tension and bringing resolution to this tension has been the foundation for the world's wisdom traditions. And so what we can do is we can start with that. We can start with kind of on one side of the spectrum here, we have the self. And we'll get more into what the self is later. And on the other side, we have other. And so there's two spectrums. There's the idea of one side you've got other, one side you have self, and everything in between is sort of your range of experience. In fact, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger here, just for the purposes of illustrating this point. Let's see here. So we'll start with, told you this is all improvised here. So we have other on this side, and we have self on this side. And there exists between the two of these what we refer to as the axis of rapprochement. This is the axis of rapprochement. Okay, and what the axis of rapprochement means, it's effectively just the tension that we feel between self and between other. So there's a tension that exists. Are we going too deep into self, are we going too deep into other, and where we fall in the middle. And so how we experience that is what we call, there's an anxiety or a fear that occurs the closer that we get to self and the closer that we get to what we would know as other. So that can be defined or described as, let's see here, so there's sort of a barrier that happens between these two. So this would be, on one hand, this would be what we call engulfment anxiety. As we start to approach into the other, we enter into engulfment. There's engulfment anxiety happening over here. The other side, we have isolation. Isolation anxiety. Okay, so this effectively is framing our experience. If we get too close to the self, which would mean too isolated, we're not around other people, we don't have the distractions, we're only left with our thoughts. The fear that can come up for folks, the deep fear and terror that people have by being isolated or being inside of themselves. So the primary fear here is isolation, and our desire on this side is a desire for connection. So isolation, anxiety, and then we could say down here, there's a desire for connection. On the other side, we have the engulfment anxiety. And when you're in a state of engulfment anxiety, or when your engulfment anxiety is driving you, you're also, in this sense, you have a desire for autonomy or for freedom. So your desire is for autonomy. Actually, I shouldn't say freedom. That's a bit different. So it's a desire for autonomy. Yeah, we often confuse freedom for autonomy as well as folks confuse connection for freedom too. So, okay, isolation anxiety, which is fear of isolation, fear of engulfment, and over here it's a desire for autonomy. So let's talk a little bit more about what that means. On the isolation anxiety side, that would be in relationship or something, you might, it's like you're clinging on to someone, or like you really are clinging on to a relationship, you're clinging on to connection with other. And on the engulfment anxiety side, your isolation, you're distancing, you're separating yourself from these things. Now, so this would be like, we could call this your threshold, your anxiety threshold, or your isolation threshold. And so this would be like isolation threshold. And over here would be your engulfment threshold. And what those pieces do, what those threshold pieces do, is they set up for you, or they define what we call the window of tolerance. So your window of tolerance is effectively what experiences you can have that you can be fully present, what experiences you can be fully present to, fully experience, and not be be uncomfortable. To actually just to take those experiences in and not be thrown outside of your experience. Now, I should actually say comfort is different than tolerance. So you might be uncomfortable, but there's a sense of, as you get closer to the edge, it gets more and more and more uncomfortable until you can no longer tolerate it, and at that point, something has to change. Like something has to change. So in your window of tolerance, also, you could, in a way, that is your paradigm. That's the paradigm with which you live, and you are operating from within this window of tolerance. So what does that look like in a practical example? Well, for example, if you are a person that has a tendency to feel isolation anxiety, okay, so here we have a kid, this could be the person, the person falls somewhere along this line, the kid goes off, goes to summer camp, and he's leaving, he's leaving his family. So now the kid is moving into his, the zone of isolation anxiety. Okay, he cries, he freaks out, and then maybe he tries to call the parents or have the parents pick him. That doesn't work. That doesn't work, and then he starts to get more comfortable and starts to have fun, and then of course at the end of the week he doesn't want to go home. As a former camp counselor at Camp Notre Dame when I was in college, so it happened all the time. So you see that. You see people going through a situation, oh no, they need to change it, I need to leave, I need to leave, I need to leave. For whatever reason they don't leave, and then, oh, now I'm more comfortable. So they're leaving behind something. Now that can work the other way too. In terms of summer camp, there's also different things at play here. Is he afraid because he's leaving his parents? Or is she afraid because she's entering into a lot of other people? There's other connection. There's a lot more connection. For someone who's been living in isolation for some time, has had to cut themselves off, and then they come back into a society or into a relationship with deeper intimacy, can be really frightening for them. There's a sense that they're going to lose themselves, or there's going to be some piece of them that is getting lost. Think about a soldier who is off fighting in a battle and has to cut himself off from his emotional experience to really be able to deal and survive with what's going on, with taking life and having his life threatened, etc., and comes back home and now has a loving, safe container of a relationship with his wife or with her husband, or etc., and with their partner. And then all of a sudden there's this sense of, whoa, like I'm actually really fully present to intimacy and connection with other human, and that can actually be disturbing for some folks, and they have to acclimate to that. So there's a sense that there's a spectrum of experience, and the job of our psyche is the part of us that is trying to preserve the self. It's trying to keep us alive so that we survive, but it's also trying to maximize our optimal personality. So it actually wants us to thrive. So the psyche is a part of us that is it's optimizing for survival first, and within the confines of helping me survive, it's also optimizing for me to thrive. And by thrive we mean to really expand into your optimal personality, which would be the widening of the window of tolerance. So if you can think about the experiences that you're able to go through in life, that there are that the wider that window of tolerance is, the wider the window. Where's my other hand here? The wider the window, the more experience of life you can tolerate, that you can and actually and take in and integrate and process and really live to be fully alive in that space. So as the window of tolerance expands, we are able to experience more fully. That is ultimately kind of what one of our primary goals is. Our primary drives is to widen that window of tolerance bigger and bigger. And as that window of tolerance gets bigger and bigger, we have something else that begins to happen, because what we can see here is there's another axis at play here. And that's the duality-unity axis. And the duality-unity axis is interesting. On one hand, we have duality, which is really what enables our existence. For me and you to exist as a me and a you on a fundamental level, we need to experience separation. I mean, the separation in a way is, we say that it's an illusion to some extent, and it is. The separation is an illusion. It's we call it the space-time construct, etc. But there's an illusion. The illusion of other requires duality, right? It requires it. If there was no duality, we wouldn't have self and other. So kind of the most extreme side of this is just individual, no real sense of what understanding of how those two relate, and just, the dualistic place. The other side of this would be just full unity, which is just oneness. And what we find is that as this window of tolerance expands, kind of this foundation of unity, this is sort of like, the foundation of the universe here, that our experience of unity, more of that can get through. So the wider that window of tolerance, the more feelings of unity can actually get through and can get into someone. So, wow, okay. So let's talk about what happens when these, with isolation anxiety and engulfment anxiety, and how those things actually form within this model. So we've got to, again, we kind of start with the Big Bang, and then we kind of turned into, we have life forming, etc., and evolution, and animals, and fish, fish are animals, fish, and mammals, and then higher primates, and then humans, etc. And at some point, you're born, right? And when you're born into an ecology that is going to basically communicate to you what is safe, what is not safe, and it's going to really frame up how you interact with people and humans in relationship for the rest of your life, and you're going to pass it on to your kids, etc. So for many of you, you may be familiar with the term attachment theory. Attachment theory is a psychological frame model that is used to understand how babies relate to their parents. That's like child attachment. And then there's also attachment theory with adults, that those same types of relationships move into adulthood, and the way that we relate with our caregivers as we're younger actually translates into our relationships with other humans into the future. So we're going to talk a little bit about attachment theory. And so there's basically two different types of attachment. Well, there's two major subsets of attachment. One is to be securely attached, and one is to be insecurely attached. In secure attachment, this is easily identifiable when you watch parents with their kids. The kid is inside of its window of tolerance, and it's comfortable. Parents are there. Both people have a pretty wide window of tolerance. The kid's able to go and explore the world, and then it kind of will hit a pocket of, something goes wrong. It gets a little bit too by itself. It gets a bit too engulfed, whatever that is, and it comes. It gets scared. The kid comes back. To the parent. The parent attunes with the child, which means that the parent's internal emotional system actually gets in rapport with that of the child. It actually feels fully. Typically, this is the mother. Mothers just have this much more naturally, but dads have it too. It just takes a bit more practice, I think. The mother will attune to the baby, which means they kind of get on the same frequency emotionally. The mother is very comfortable with her full range of emotional experience. She doesn't get triggered into some fear or go into some story about how she's a bad mom, because she just holds space for the child, attunes, and in that attunement, and in the mother, if the mother feels safe with the emotional experience of the child, what she teaches the baby is that your experience is safe. Whatever your anger, your emotion, your fear, your crying, your happiness, your sadness, your joy, all of those there's a home for all of those, and it's all safe. So there's actually a sense of creating a safe container. The mother's creating a safe container. That's what love is, by the way, is creating a conscious container for someone else's in your own full experience and their full range of emotion. They're creating this container for experience. Okay, that's a securely attached mother-child or parental caregiver-child relationship. In the space of that, a lot of things can go wrong. In some families, there is no attunement, there is no connection, and so what happens is the kid comes in, something happens, parent just really kind of ignores the kid, or maybe punishes the kid for how it's feeling, for how he or she is feeling. So and then what happens there is the personality fractures, and the kid develops an insecure attachment. There's 3 different types of insecure attachment. The first type of insecure attachment is avoidant, which basically means they don't really. You can see this when the parents come, when the parent leaves or the parent comes. There's no real kid doesn't really care. It's not. It just doesn't. It doesn't have any interest in. It's not particularly upset when the parent leaves. It's not particularly excited when the parent returns. It's kind of just doing its own thing. It's basically avoiding attachment, just avoiding it. It doesn't have a real attachment. It's avoidant. There is so that's one style of attachment. avoidant attachment, of insecure attachment. So there's secure, and then there's insecure, and then there's 3 types of insecure attachment. The first of which being, we're talking about, is avoidant attachment. The second of which is anxious attachment. It's also called ambivalent attachment. So in ambivalent or anxious attachment, what happens is the kid is excessively clingy. Like when the parent tries to leave, the kid freaks out. It's like not letting the mom or dad leave, like holding on the leg, crying, screaming. Then after they leave, the kid is just like in distress. The parent comes back, it's like, oh, it's just like freaking out. And oftentimes when the parent comes back, it actually doesn't reconnect. It's like just in this triggered state. So that would be ambivalent or anxious attachment. And I'm going to show you how these sync up to this model in a second, how that kind of frames things. And then the third is disorganized attachment, which is basically they kind of exhibit characterizes both. They're kind of dazed or just kind of confused. Like sometimes they're crying, sometimes they're not. It just what that translates to is a super narrow window of tolerance. And these kids, these people, they're often this feels like this in the tribe of psychiatry, they might call this borderline personality disorder when they're adults, etc. So, and that's the thing, is as someone progresses through these different phases, as they develop this attachment style when they're a kid, that frames up how they're going to relate in the intimacy space with other human beings, both creatively and intimately with their romantic partner, with their business partners, with their team, with their tribe, and with their kids. So this is the stuff that goes down. And that really is where our work to do is fixing these attachment, call them the attachment wounding. That's where a lot of focus is being placed, and building secure connection between individuals and in a relationship, which is a big part of the work that I do. Okay, let's see where this is we're gonna pull some of this stuff together here. So, in a secure attachment, we have a very wide window of tolerance. Erase some of this stuff here so we can kind of diagram out a little more of where these things go. So I'm going to show kind of what are some different looks here for what can happen. So we'll start with the secure attachment. Maybe we'll kind of draw secure attachment kind of in blue so you can see what secure attachment might look like. So secure attachment might look like, a relatively small amount of isolation anxiety. A relatively small amount of engulfment anxiety. And in a wide window of tolerance. So, a really wide window of tolerance. Wide window of tolerance, all right? In this situation, this would be a securely attached human. They're open for a lot of feelings of unity, of really having that sense of oneness with their tribe and with their people. And they form great relationships. They form relationships that support and nurture them, and they're not afraid to. They actually are able to create relationships that are synergistic, where they're both people benefit. So let's look at the next type of let's look at some insecure attachments and what those look like. So for an individual that has, say, a lot of isolation anxiety, right? They have like a ton of isolation anxiety. So they have like a lot of isolation anxiety. Okay, and maybe just a smaller amount of engulfment anxiety. They have a window of tolerance that is, it's relatively small. It's smaller. So it's a smaller window of tolerance. So in this case, this would be a person that would exhibit, we talked about before, this would be like an ambivalent or an anxious attachment style. They have a big fear of being alone, big fear of being isolated, and so their strongest desire is for connection, and they're going to be overly, they'll be overly, clingy in relationship is what we would say. It's like they're actually trying to get their needs met by this other because they're so afraid of being alone. So that would be that's one possible, one possible look. The other, okay, so that would be, again, this is what an anxious or an ambivalent attachment would look like. It's big thing here. Let's see here. So, and then what does, say, for example, avoidant attachment look like? Well, a ton of engulfment anxiety, a larger amount of engulfment anxiety, a smaller amount of, of isolation anxiety, and, again, a moderately small window of tolerance. So again, the person is super afraid of being engulfed, of kind of losing themselves in another, of being controlled, of what all this stuff that comes with the fear of engulfment, of having another person engulf you, and so they move towards self. So this is the person that's avoidant. They really aren't. They're kind of at a distance. They're not really that available for intimacy. They kind of tend to be an outsider, kind of a lone wolf. They're on the edge. So that would be folks that have isolation, that have less isolation anxiety and more engulfment anxiety. Now, what happens if you've got a ton of both of these things? Okay, so maybe, you've got a lot of engulfment anxiety. You also got a lot of isolation anxiety. And you've got this really tiny window of tolerance with which you can survive. This would be that disorganized attachment, and it doesn't take much for you to be, feeling like, whoa, you're really way too alone. It also doesn't take much for you to feel like you're completely overwhelmed. It's like you've got this tiny little range you're bouncing back and forth in, and this is the person that is in. Each of those attachment styles, of those insecure attachment styles, can lead to a lot of challenges. This one feels like it's often the most problematic for people. These people are the most prone to psychosis, and we're going to talk about what psychosis actually is versus what the current paradigm says it is. But people with a super narrow window of tolerance, they develop a lot of strategies for themselves, that might work temporarily. You'll see a lot of people taking a lot of, anti-anxiety medications and antipsychotics just to kind of reinforce, as opposed to widening the window of tolerance. They actually try to cut off. They try to build bigger walls. They start building walls around their threshold. So their strategies are, okay, I'm going to isolate myself from people. I'll have some relationships in a very particular way. We won't talk about certain things. We'll have this very narrow range of experience that we manage the shit out of our lives to keep this window of tolerance as it is. Now, we all exhibit this to some extent. It's more pronounced, and we can see it more in folks with a smaller window of tolerance, which also, we can have compassion for it in them, and gives us a chance to expand our window from the things that we learn from here. However, we can figure these things out. Now, the main mechanisms that it appears that cause someone's window, to go from, and presumably we could argue that as a child, you've got a big window of tolerance. You're in the world, your window, in a sense, you've outsourced your window of tolerance to your parents, but the individual kid they're just taking in information, and they're learning about their world, and they're building up what their window of tolerance is. They're learning that from their caregivers and the people that surround them for the most part. Typically, this window of tolerance, and by the way, this is what personal growth is. When you ask someone what is personal growth, and they give you some confused answer, it's because most people don't really know what they're talking about with that. Okay, so what personal growth is it's nothing more than an expansion of your window of tolerance. That's it. You're growing in your ability to hold a container for the dynamic range of all the experiences of your life. That's it. Very simple. And true confidence, by the way, true self-esteem is not based on some external accomplishment, as we know. It's not based on some other person's validation for you. Self-esteem. Here's a definition of what self-esteem is. Self-esteem is your confidence in your ability to trust that you will survive your entire range of experience. That's it. You will survive your entire range of experience. That's where the true, deep self-esteem comes from. It's not from the temporary security, self-security, even of security and having a job or having a bunch of money in the bank or having these different things in place. And those things can create a platform for you to survive on. However, the true self-esteem comes from knowing that all those things can be taken away and you will still be able to survive. That you have a deep trust in your own ability to survive anything that comes your way. And not just survive the physical stuff, but to be able to survive and experience and process all the emotion that you're going to be experiencing in that moment, to be fully present to what is. That's what true self-esteem is, the confidence knowing that you can be fully present to what is. So as we are experiencing life and things happen that move us outside this window of tolerance, so say for example something happens and this person, we'll use this person because they've got the narrowest window, something happens and all of a sudden the individual person who normally is living here now finds themselves out here. So, well, shit, they're way outside their window of tolerance. Okay, what happens? What strategies does our psyche use when we find ourselves outside our window of tolerance? Well, now again, this is a framework. It's not something that is it's set in stone. But generally, what we see are that people will use these strategies. So when you move outside your window of tolerance, the first thing that we'll try to do is rearrange the external environment. Again, I use that example of a kid going to summer camp. The first thing they do, the psyche's job, okay, I'm uncomfortable, so the easiest kind of shortcut method is if I can just change the external environment. So I'll complain, I'll bitch to the parents, I'll cry, I'll try to just, I'll do something. I might even get in trouble, so they send me home. Like, you'll do all kinds of stuff inside that space just so you don't experience the pain of being outside your window of tolerance. You'll try to change the external environment, take control. You see this. This is the coercion that happens in codependent relationships when people are getting uncomfortable. They'll use these coercive tactics to mitigate the space between them. For folks that are in codependent, and if they're codependent and avoidant, they're going to use some coercive tactics to put distance. Maybe they just cut themselves off from the relationship, and they can't deal with the intimacy, the fear, their fear of intimacy of other. On the other hand, for a person that can't deal with intimacy of self, they'll use coercive tactics to keep the person in relationship, and kind of and of course that for both of them it ends up becoming this nightmare because the avoidant person is moving away, and the other person is moving towards, and they're both trying to get that need met. But the truth is they actually both could they could actually move into secure attachment and expand their window of tolerance, and they can actually then relate with one another as human beings. But so in any case, trying to change that external piece is we're going to try to change the external environment. If that doesn't work, well then okay. We don't have an option to change the external environment. So what are we going to do? We'll attempt to expand our window of tolerance. So we can move this gradually, and this can move out a little bit, and we'll say, okay, can my window of tolerance get a little bit bigger, and can I integrate this experience? Can this experience now become part of just something I'm comfortable with? Can I be comfortable with this level of connection or this level of isolation? That's just with this level of autonomy. Can I be comfortable with this level of autonomy? Can I be comfortable with this level of isolation? That's the expansion piece. Sometimes that's successful, just like sometimes it's successful that you can change the external environment around. If a person is being too clingy in the relationship, for example, you establish the boundary. So like, here's what I need, and you express your need to that person. And if they then in turn are able to integrate and grow, in outside their window of tolerance, and this is what love does. When people are in love, it's the biggest catalyst for personal growth. If they commit to true love, it has inside of it the power to dynamically change all of this stuff for people. Of course, we don't market it that way to folks, but we're able to expand a little bit. When someone establishes a boundary, we get to play with that boundary. But and that will be that person expanding in. So the one person changes the external environment, and then the other person expands their window of tolerance. If they're going to stay in a relationship, that's how that express need, establish boundary, set ultimatum, hold that, and then another person can expand to that. Now, challenge is that sometimes that doesn't work either. Sometimes you're too far outside the window of tolerance, and the window of tolerance can't expand. It's not able to. You can't do it. So what happens then? If the window of tolerance can't expand to create to hold the experience that you're having, the next piece is that we destabilize our cognitive constructs. Now, our cognitive constructs are effectively the ideas and the interpretations and how we process the information that is coming into us. Okay, so we have this sense of information that's coming in, and okay, maybe I can look at this a different way. Maybe I can change the story that is in my mind about what's happening. Maybe I can change a fundamental belief structure that I have around something. For example, you might use the example of someone who's like afraid of people that are like gay people. They're homophobic, right? And they've got this deeply rooted belief. Maybe it's rooted in some sort of distorted religious structure where they're like afraid of gay people on some level. And so you could put them in a room with someone who's gay, and and for a lot of those people, they're really uncomfortable. They're just going to be super uncomfortable. No matter how much time they spend there, they're probably not going to if they're still holding this belief and they're still interpreting data in a particular way, this person's going to hell and this whole thing, they're actually in hell at that moment, and they're unable to fully integrate the experience. So what it's going to take for someone like that is they're actually going to need to reform and shift their fundamental cognitive structure, a way of interpreting information into the world. They're going to change the way they interpret the data that's coming into them. That often can be successful, and if that's the case, and they move back, they're back within their window of tolerance, because what they're seeing, they recognize that what they've been seeing is actually false. And so then they correct what they're seeing in some way, or the shadow of that might be that they're distorting their reality. They actually distort their reality in such a way that, they're just not going to believe this or something. And those strategies are useful to some extent. You can change your perceptions to some extent, and that will change, your experience. But sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes sometimes the psyche isn't able to have to shift your cognitive construct in such a way. And then what happens is, we destabilize the cognitive constructs, which means that we're basically stripping away a lot of the meaning that we put onto things, a lot of the interpretation. So the meaning and the interpretation and the way and the categories we put things in, those get kind of stripped away, and then we rapidly expand our window of tolerance. So now we're in a situation where, bam, we're just going to push the window fast. The window of tolerance expands. Oftentimes when that happens, you now get an influx of experiences of unity. And when those experiences of unity come in, they can be somewhat challenging. Now, if that expansion happens and we rapidly expand, we rapidly destabilize our cognitive constructs, we rapidly increase our window of tolerance. This might happen in the case of like an epiphany, like some epiphany happens, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a new paradigm. Because again, the anxiety is that we feel. It's the pain of our paradigm. You understand? That is the pain of our paradigm. And we can do a lot, to mitigate the pain. We can take drugs, we can distract ourselves, we can numb ourselves out, we can avoid certain people and relationships and situations, and we can live in this little tiny box, which is what people are doing. However, there's a sense that, that's your paradigm, and your paradigm is always incomplete. There's always another paradigm to break into. And so that strategy only works for so long. Eventually it breaks down, But if you get present to the pain is a great motivator to move you into the next paradigm. So as you expand in, and that may work, you might, I broke through, I'm in this new paradigm of understanding, and it's beautiful, and it's gorgeous, and I totally get it, and I'm now able to function in the world, my window of tolerance is open, is wider, and I've changed the way I think about the world. That's like a high growth experience, right? That would be like you've hit a new stage of your development. And and these things can happen from things like traveling, people that travel often, or you go to outer space. Sometimes people have a psychedelic experience that expands their window of tolerance, and then when that window of tolerance is open, they can have an epiphany, and they can have some new, they can reorganize some of their cognitive structures, etc. Now, what happens if that doesn't work? What happens if I've expanded my window of tolerance, I've changed some cognitive structures, and it doesn't work? Well, then what happens is often a process that modern psychiatry calls psychosis, in which the individual basically is liquefying. It's like you're rebooting from the operating system. You're shutting down. You're stripping away much of the meaning from your environment, and you're creating new cognitive construct kind of from the ground up. You're essence, you're rebooting the operating system, and so, it's a riskier strategy, because you're cutting through, you're turning off, or you're stripping away much of the meaning and much of the interpretation that you've given the world, and you're kind of just standing, so to speak, just in direct communion with what is and what reality is. And so in that very vulnerable psychic space, there's a sense that you're in direct communion with, with the truth, of just direct connection with what is. The challenge, though, is that now you've had this experience being directly in contact with the truth and what is, and if you can come out of that with, an epiphany, or you come out of that with an expansion, some people call that like a mystical experience, a spiritual or religious experience, it's very beautiful. It can be very healing. We call, in a sense, we call it, there's an ego death that happens. If the ego is the construct that holds your paradigm in place, and protects you from intimacy of self and other to a certain extent, you really, in that psychosis, you're experiencing an ego death. Your constructs are dying, and there's now just what remains, which is the true self. And if you can, in that space, fully integrate and process through that and fully experience what's happening, there's a good chance, actually, that you will move through that. The challenge is that in Western psychiatry, Western medicine, that folks don't. We tend to, when someone enters into a psychotic space, because it's outside the window of tolerance, not just for the individual, but you're also outside the window of tolerance for the collective, for the most part. For the tribe that you're in, they don't have a process by which to integrate that. So what do? Well, they're trying to use the same strategies. They want to pull you back in to that paradigm. And so, the psychiatry paradigm was one of kind of born of modernity and of science, but it's a science that doesn't really allow for anomalous experience. For spirituality is not so much contained in a pill, of that frame. And so folks are meaning well, but what they're actually doing is they're stopping a process, and they're preventing you from moving into a new paradigm and to reform some things about yourself, to be able to help. Now, of course, if you're distressed and you don't have tribe, again, it's like limited tools. There's a limited tool set, but there is this other way, which is connecting with folks that have themselves been through a psychosis successfully, experienced that ego death, reformed their self-image and their world image, and now are able to hold space not only for themselves when they go through that experience, but to be able to hold space and help guide someone else through that experience. This would be, for example, the path of the shaman. You've heard of the shaman, the wounded healer. He who was sick, who has healed himself, and now he can heal others. That is the frame of many traditions, many tribal traditions, many tribal peoples. that's been completely stripped away. Now, the irony is that when we look at outcomes for folks that are diagnosed with different types of psychosis, psychotic things like bipolar, schizophrenia, etc., it appears, according to the World Health Organization, that there's a much deeper, the success rates, this is again a World Health Organization study. They're, of course, not perfect, but it looks like when we look at the data that folks that live in tribal cultures and live in other parts of the world where psychosis is actually just allowed to kind of process, and they have a support community, and there's actually some reverence and honoring for it, and the culture responds and actually uses the information that comes back from that and integrates that as a culture, that folks heal. And they actually not only heal, but they go on to thrive, and they're actually better, so to speak. Their window of tolerance, they've grown, is wider than when they entered into the psychosis. In the West, though, we just don't have that frame, and so we basically seek to keep people in a small window of tolerance for their experience, and psychiatry is just pumping people full of drugs to do that. They're just using it. They're medicating away the information they're cutting off the experience for people just to manage this very small window of tolerance. And it's not always this drug. People use a lot of strategies to keep their window of tolerance short. Sex, workaholism, all the addictions that people have are trying to maintain their experience inside this small window of tolerance. So psychosis, again, can be it's a naturally occurring process that happens when our self-image, our paradigm, our self-image and world image, which is our paradigm, no longer serves us. It becomes too painful to hold on to that. And if it's a partial paradigm, or it's just the pain of that paradigm becomes overwhelming. We actually need to break through to the next level. And so when we allow that process to happen, we can be fully present with the psychosis, and we can have someone guide us through that. We can guide ourselves in a certain sense. We can find our way through it. When you have when you have the hope that you can move through it, and you've got a structure to help you do that, you end up with a much wider window of tolerance, right? So which means increased capacity to love yourself and to love others. It's a huge piece of what that is. Now, not every caterpillar turns into a butterfly, unfortunately. And I think it's important to point out that psychosis is a relatively risky strategy that our bodies, especially in the modern world, because you got people that you'll get committed to a hospital and you get pumped full of drugs, and then you're not ever going to get out. They actually have laws that allow psychiatrists are able to go to a judge and to force you to take a medication against your will that will prevent you from ever breaking out of that place. So that's a pretty scary prospect. And again, in their world, they're like, oh, this person, they're so distressed and in so much pain. We should end their pain and end their suffering and help them. Well, it probably comes from a good place, but there's also this thing called economic incentives and big pharma psychiatry, and antipsychotics are $1 billion industry. All right, so the other piece, though, is that if that psychosis isn't allowed to complete, what can happen is you kind of enter into a reboot loop. So they go into a psychosis, they kind of reform some new constructs. If those constructs allow them to experience more, they heal, they move through. But oftentimes they might not. And then what happens? Well, then they'll go into a deeper and deeper and deeper psychosis, and that does happen to some people. Again, not all folks that get that get sick and get better. I think that this is an unfortunate reality of our species, and just of the way that nature works, is that not everyone makes it through. Not everyone that tries to climb Everest succeeds. Some people do die. I know in my own personal journey, I felt it was a very frightening prospect to be faced with a tribe of psychiatry saying that I had bipolar 1 when I was younger. They said that I had schizophrenia, and being in a place of feeling like I wanted to get fully resourced and move through that on my own, with a support team, but not with the kind of traditional methods, because I felt like that was a road to nowhere. There was no light at the end of that tunnel, so to speak. It was a very dark tunnel and a very long tunnel. It just seemed to go on forever. So, so I guess, for me, that was, I get into some more of my process and kind of what's been my story in some other, in other videos, future videos, and other stuff that I've done. But that overall process is powerful. And if you've got the right people in the right context, and so my sense is that for me, having a model like this to be able to use, knowing that that's kind of the way things operate, and that ultimately, our psyche is trying to preserve the self and thrive. So it's going to have strategies to keep us within our window of tolerance, but at the same time, it's going to want to expand our window of tolerance so that we can be fully present to more experience. And again, as we start to expand our window of tolerance, we're more open to feelings of unity. So there's a deeper sense of oneness, a deeper sense of connection. In my experience, we get to have a much deeper report of the fundamental miracle and synchronicity of everything that's occurring around us. There's a sense that as our window of tolerance opens up, there's a deeper, more profound connection to unity. Synchronicity, to miracles, these kinds of things. And you can hold a space to allow those to come in and to be noticing them. Again, putting you in a deeper sense of gratitude, which is ultimately the goal. It's not happiness. People get confused. They think that happiness is the goal. The goal is actually to be in a place of gratitude. And from there, we can move forward. Let me see here. So I think that ultimately presents, the model. We covered what is personal growth. It's the expansion of the window of tolerance. I touched on what this concept of what love is, but I think that we can look at love in a very simple way, which is love is that which enables us to fully empowers us to feel and experience everything. You can look at we call it the big love, the big love of the universe, of like God, of the container that holds everything, from kids being tortured, in the Congo, to people going to outer space, to people falling in love, to having children. So like the extreme fear and the extreme kind of human love and connection that we experience, all that is being held within this gigantic container of universal love and experience. So of universal love, of love of God, just love. In fact, there's, the wisdom traditions say God is love. So you have this fundamental container of love, and when the individual gets congruent with that process, and they get in deep intimacy with other, with the love of the universe, then they're actually able to understand what that means for oneself. So to be moving and to be in alignment with the universal experience of love would be to have the individual loving themselves, love yourself as if, as the universe loves you. Well, the universe gives you full safety and range of experiencing full range of experience. You give that to yourself by having a wide window of tolerance. The more that you actively create a container for your own experience, and the truth is by just trusting, trust is a big deal. When you actually just trust in the infinite container of love that's around you, that holds you in this universe, that's actually you doing the best thing you can do for loving yourself, because it gives you an opportunity to love your experience, to be in experience, to be grateful for no matter what is happening, and to be in that sense. And it also prepares you, so you have intimacy with the infinite, intimacy with your interior, understanding yourself, feeling your emotions, being fully present to your desires and your fears, etc. And when you've done that properly, you can be resourced, you can be empowered to have intimacy, to have true intimacy with other. To be able to interface with the infinite through another person. So at first it's intimacy through self, intimacy with the infinite. You find that inside yourself, and then you're able to connect with that in other people. This is nothing new. This is namaste, like the God in me greets the God in you. And in Christian mythology, they talk about Christ consciousness and Christ reincarnating into all of the Christ. The second coming of Christ is within all of you. It's in Buddhism, it's the next Buddha is a Sangha, that there's a reincarnation of the Buddha consciousness into everyone, and as you progress down the path, you can see that in all individuals. So again, nothing new. The wisdom traditions have identified these things. It's just being presented